So today's session is going to be about DevSecOps. And what we are primarily going to be talking about is how we can use DevSecOps in this advanced software industry and make our DevOps practice a little more secure. So a little about me. I am Jonathan Barrera, and I'm a senior developer advocate at Telerik, which does a lot on the forefront of software development and deployment. We do a lot for the open source community, and we have been actively participating and contributing to the open source community, and which is one of the reasons why open source initiatives are close to our hearts and close to everyone working at the company. Before this, I worked at amazing companies like Postman, wherein I learned a lot and saw DevOps being implemented in real time. Alongside, I have also helped a lot of companies understand and adopt the DevOps practice and see how they can make their engineering workflows better and more reliable and more scalable. And finally, I am a huge open source enthusiast myself. I have been dabbling in the open source community since I think my college days. One of my major contribution has been to the Mozilla Firefox OS project. I'm not sure how many of you all have heard about the Mozilla Firefox mobile OS, but it was one of those upcoming projects which never really took off, but it was a huge learning experience and it had a lot of potential. So let's, before I even get started, I want to talk a little about something that Mark Anderson had said back in the year 2011. And he said, and I quote, "Software is eating the world." And now it's almost a decade later, and you realize it's really true, because back then in 2011, we still hadn't really seen an explosion in the software industry. But right now, everything is completely owned and run on only software. So everything right from let's take the extreme points. You want to scan the surface of the ocean beds. You use software. Right up to something happening in the International Space Station, there is software involved. So software is literally everywhere. In fact, even something that we are doing right now, this meeting is being hosted on Zoom, which is an amazing software which has really revolutionized how meetings occur and has been really instrumental in changing the entire, or rather helping the community during this time of pandemic when people couldn't really meet in real life. Something like this was really not possible back in 2010, for example, because in 2010, the only meeting option you had was probably Cisco's WebEx, which first of all costed a lot, but more importantly was so clunky and so difficult to use, and it was something that only the elite had access to. But with Zoom, literally everyone has access to meeting software, and Geo is taking it one step forward, in fact. So let's see what are some of the things that really have helped boost this entire software industry. And there are two major things that I want to talk about today. And the first one is the cloud adoption. So if you see over the last 10 years, the cloud adoption and the market size of cloud services has just gone up and risen exponentially. So if you compare the year 2010 with the year 2019, which just went by last year, you will see a more than 10x rise. And this is phenomenal given that how the industry has been moving. And if you even see 2020, the number that you see right there is the number that was picked up before COVID pandemic happened. And obviously after the entire situation changed, more companies started realizing more than ever before that they really needed to shift their entire businesses over to the cloud, because remote working was the new hot thing that was going on in the industry. So I decided to look at a couple of challenges that we thought adopting cloud would really bring by. And even before I started thinking about this, I thought one of the major one would be migrating to cloud. How do you migrate from using a on-prem server to completely on cloud? I thought that would be the biggest concern that companies or individuals use or planning on moving to the cloud would have. But turns out I was wrong. Turns out cloud migration is one of the least concerns that the respondents in this survey had. But it's interesting to note that the highest priority that they had was security on cloud. And things are really serious when the cloud spend itself is not so much as a concern for people. And I want to point out that this one of the major problems that people had initially was the cost of cloud, but right now security even tops that. And these are the top cloud challenges that apparently have been mentioned in the year 2020. The second thing that I want to talk about is the entire philosophy of DevOps, which has literally changed how software is being developed and how fast it comes to the market. And I think DevOps is one of the reasons why instead of taking a year or two for a software to come out, it's now taking a couple of months or a couple of weeks. And we have new software rolling out almost every day. So back in 2010, it would every time there's a new software you would hear about it, because in a month there might be just one or at most two if it's a hot month. But right now on any given day, I'm pretty sure there'll be at least 10 to 15 new softwares rolling out. And I'm not even talking about things which are just copied. I'm talking about real software. And a true example of this is if you go to Product Hunt, you will see what I'm talking about. So this is only possible because of DevOps. And the way that DevOps actually did this and got this exponential growth is by bringing together a couple of philosophies that we heard in the last session that Rajat was talking about. And in fact, we'll hear more about the DevOps philosophies and how it really helps the go-to-market time in another session, which is happening later today. I would recommend that you listen to that as well. But in this session, I'm not going to dive into DevOps particularly, but since we're talking about DevSecOps, there would be a little overlap here and there. For those who haven't really worked with DevOps before or haven't heard about DevOps before, there's nothing to be worried about. You won't be lost. So I would say just hang on and listen to what I have to say. And then maybe if you find this interesting, you can then go listen to the DevOps talk happening later. And then you will have an added advantage of having that security first mindset when you've already heard about the security part of DevOps. So talking about how software has really started growing exponentially, one of the major reason is because right now it's really, really simple and easy to create new software. And it has never been easier than this before. And this is primarily because DevOps practices have reduced that entire time from the time you code till the time you deploy. And that entire life cycle has reduced greatly from initially taking a couple of months to now at most a few weeks, if not just a couple of days. And the other interesting thing that has happened is a lot of startups have started owning this ecosystem. So initially, like back in the days, you would only have software coming in from the bigs, like, for example, you would have Microsoft, you would have Cisco, you would have IBM creating software, and then everyone had to take that because there was no alternative. But now with startups really trying to break into the market and say, hey, this is a better way to do this, you get a lot of options and you have better software coming up. And this is also a challenge to the enterprises to, up their game and come up with really amazing software which can stand the test of time, or then otherwise they'll just be forgotten. But this also brings to fore another change in the approach itself. So if most of the enterprises used to at least conform to the waterfall approach, which meant each individual stage of the software development lifecycle was completed and then passed on to the next without any kind of backward communication. And you needed to wait until the last stage to actually see how the software looked. And this is primarily why it took sometimes months, sometimes even years to actually see the end result of a software. But with startups mostly adhering to DevOps approaches, you can see the minimum viable product, as they like to call it, as soon as in a couple of days sometimes. And in fact, I've seen startups hacking away in this weekend hackathons and literally coming up with a MVP in just a couple of hours. So, but the advantage that I see of this situation is one thing that has really changed is the user experience. For example, take for example Zoom. Zoom is so much simpler to use and so much more intuitive than any other meeting app that was built by an enterprise back then. Like 10 years back, I couldn't think of a Zoom, because we all thought that having a meeting was something which was which you needed an IT guy to set things up. But right now here we can do things all by ourselves. And even if there are technical issues like what just happened earlier in this session, we can fix it by ourselves. We didn't need an IT support guy to come in and say, oh, this is going to take a couple of hours or a couple of days. Or he didn't say, did you try turning it off and turning it on? So all of those things have been completely handled and taken care really well by startups which strive to provide the best user experience. And at the same time, they also make sure that the cost factor is in check. Any enterprise application, would be very expensive to build. And even if you want to license it, it's going to cost a lot. Whereas with startups, they've come up with this new licensing models, which make it really easy and relatively cheaper to own software licenses. The other thing is the global presence that users are having right now. Initially, software was primarily first started being adopted in the North American regions, but now every corner of the world is using software. And like I said, it's not only for things like checking the oceans or running the space station that you use software for, but everything right from even farming, you can use software for that. And that is software is literally falling in everyone's hand, and the end user is everywhere. And the COVID pandemic has just proved this, because right now software is being used from various parts and people aren't really supporting it locally, but everything is happening virtually. The other very important part that I really want to talk about is software democratization. And this is something that Mr. Ravi was talking in the keynote earlier today that Microsoft also does. And that is providing building blocks. And if you went back a couple of years and you wanted to build a software, you had to start from scratch, like literally everything you had to do by yourself. But today, if I want to build a software, or if I want to build a web app, or even for that matter, a website, I have pre-existing libraries, third-party libraries, components, which are easily available. All I need to do is build on top of them. And this is one of those reasons why it becomes really simple to build new applications, and it makes it really faster. And because most of your time goes on building the additional features or the creative features as they are called, and not having to worry about the basics, because the basics are already taken care by your third-party library. And a good thing that is happening in this area is a lot of these big companies, like for example, Microsoft, you have GitHub, you have Google, you have even Netflix for that matter. They are open sourcing, not to forget Facebook, obviously. They're open sourcing a lot of their internal libraries, which now you can use. So for example, things like Angular, React, these are things which were built for internal consumption, but are now open source so that everyone can use them and can build better software and faster. The other part to this is also the low cost barrier when it comes to acquiring a cloud license. Uh, if you want, if you wanted to build an application, the first thought was, okay, I need to buy a server, and the cost of a server would run into a couple of lakhs, and that was a huge upfront investment, which not everyone was brave enough to do. But with the cloud model, and especially the use pay as you use model that a lot of cloud service providers are using, it's really simple. All it takes is a couple of dollars, and anyone can get started, not just you and me. Like literally anyone who has a couple of dollars to spend can get started with using cloud. And the best part is, to remove this friction, most of the cloud service providers even provide a free trial minutes or trial usage that you can use. But in all of this, one major thing that we see is missing is the security of all of this. And it's starting to feel that security has become just an afterthought, that something that everyone is in a hurry to deploy applications. We want users to start using them. So you probably have heard this internally, wherein everyone's saying ship faster, build faster, keep shipping. But one thing that goes amiss is mostly that security is overlooked, because everyone is excited about releasing products into the hands of their consumers, that they sometimes tend to forget about closing all the possible gaps that could be there in their security chain. And the other problem with this is sometimes and this really irritates me a lot, because I see this happening frequently. Major organizations still using manual approaches for security, and not really automating the entire security process. And this is a huge red flag, especially because as a human, it's a tendency to miss on important things. And that can be a really expensive mistake that anyone can do. I'll give you a good example of this. I don't know how many of you remember the Equifax data breach, but if 2020 is biggest problem is coronavirus, in 2017, one of the biggest problems that we had was the Equifax data breach. Now, obviously, as Indians, first of all, it didn't impact us much. Secondly, even if it did impact us, we didn't care about it much. But Equifax data breach seriously impacted nearly 150 million people in the US. And this is close to half of the population of the country. So I want to quickly run through what happened and how this entire breach transpired. So back in 2017, early in the year, there were a couple of vulnerabilities which were discovered, but no one really took them seriously. And then one group of hackers found a major vulnerability which they could exploit. And on May 13th, they started breaching the network of Equifax. Now, here is where it gets interesting. This went on till July 29th. And this is now close to more than 2 months. And only on July 29th, after 2 long months, was when the breach was actually discovered. So by the time this was discovered, it was already 2 long months. Now, add to that, it took yet another day for them to actually shut down the breach and to recover from it. And after this, it was only in September that this was publicly announced, and that's when we all came to know about it. Now, there are two important things here that I really want to stress about. First of all, the breach began on May 13th and went on undiscovered till July 29th. That's 2 long months. And that by itself is a major problem. I'll tell you why. So if you see the data that was taken in this breach, you see a lot of this data. Now, all of this data wasn't taken out in one day or in a week. This was taken over a period of 2 months. Now, if this very timeline was shortened, this data stolen would also be way lesser, and the number of people consequently impacted from it would be way lesser. The second problem that I see here is, despite the breach being detected, it still took an additional day for the breach to be shut down. That is yet another problem, which means that the security system weren't in place for something like this. Obviously, none of us expect things like this to happen to us or our applications or our companies, but that doesn't mean we do not put processes in place. So these are the two major factors that I really wanted to stress about. And this is just data that we are talking about, right? If you want to see the dollar value which a breach can cause, let me also talk about that. So, on an average, the cost which a company suffers every time there is a data breach, the cost of the company is, you won't guess this, is an average of $5 million. And that's a lot. That's a lot just to get breached for some stupid mistake that someone didn't notice. The other thing, which I'm sure is pretty obvious, is it is definitely cheaper to fix defects in development rather than fix it after it's already been deployed and already being used by your consumers. But here is where it gets really surprising. It's actually 30 times cheaper to fix it when it's in development versus when it's actually in production. So all of this bring me to my main question. While everything seems to be working well, is it that while DevOps is expediting software releases, helping us come out with build more software, better software faster, is security is the part what is holding us back? Is that the problem? Which is why we have this concept and this philosophy called DevSecOps. At its core, DevSecOps is just a combination or just an addition of security to the existing DevOps philosophy. So in DevOps, you had the development team and the operations team. Now you have the developer team, you have the operations team, but you also have the security team in between. And the reason for this, it becomes really more important is, uh, I have spoken to a lot of companies, and one thing that remains really constant is, if the development team, say suppose, has 100 people on the team, the operation teams usually have 10 people to support all that this 100 people are building. And this itself was a problem, which is why DevOps started, because the operations people started screaming, saying, hey, there is so much happening and 10 of us cannot really manage so much of this, which is why DevOps came into the picture. But when it comes to security, to support this 100 people who are developing and this 10 people who are managing all the operations, there is usually just one person available. And this is the state that you'll see most of the startups in India as well as outside India. Surprisingly, even many a times in enterprise level companies as well. So that's the thing that DevSecOps really wants to change. At its core, what DevSecOps is, it's a philosophy just like DevOps, wherein it believes in integrating security practices within the DevOps process, so that security is no longer an afterthought, but something that is being enabled along with the DevOps practice while you're building and deploying your software. So let's see some of the benefits that DevSecOps has and how it can help you in your workflow and how it can really change the way you build software. The first thing, which is obvious, is since you are integrating security into your DevOps practice, you can identify the security issues early on. So you do not have to wait till it's deployed and some user starts complaining, hey, this is a problem that I'm facing. Or you do not have to wait until some hacker comes out and says, oh, I exploited this. Something which really happened with the Aadhaar card, for example. There were a lot of stories around that, which I don't want to get into the details of. But the other thing that it really provides is speed and agility for your security teams. Now, one thing that's not really going to change, even though we wanted to, is this problem wherein we have a relatively smaller number of security people in security teams versus the developer and operations team. I know that's probably not going to change in the next couple of years, but at least getting the security team involved in the entire DevOps process right from the start helps them get ahead and helps them work a little faster, so that in the long run they are not stuck when there is a problem, and that's not the only time they suddenly realize, oh, there's a problem, where are security guys. The other thing that it also provides is an ability to respond to change and needs. So, for example, if there is an attack that you suddenly see on your system, someone is attempting a DDoS attack. So, uh, in a DevSecOps environment, since the security team is already involved, they know exactly how they can shut it down as soon as possible. So the wait time to change something doesn't is reduced from days to a couple of hours, and if possible to a couple of minutes even. And there are a lot of tools which really help with this. And also at the same time, with a lot of new compliance coming up, for example, you have the California law, we had the GDPR compliance, which came in a couple of months back. So all of these things, your security team can provide you a good insight and guidance on how to go about them. It provides more opportunities for automating your builds and also making sure there is quality assurance testing, so that every software that goes out lives to the standard that it's supposed to go by. And finally, one of the DevOps principles that is involved, it provides better collaboration and communication between not just the developer and your operations team, but now also between the developer, operation, and your security team, which makes it a complete and holistic environment. So over the years, I've heard a lot of different definitions of DevSecOps, and for that matter, even DevOps. So I just want to call out a couple of things and say, hey, this is DevSecOps and this is definitely not DevSecOps. The only reason I'm doing this is because there are a lot of myths about DevSecOps, and I just want to clear them once and for all. So for starters, DevSecOps is a mindset and an approach that you use in your team. So it doesn't have a one size fit all approach, because my strategy for DevSecOps would be completely different from yours, because your requirements are completely different from mine. Yes, you can do the same thing that I do, but the question is, will it be beneficial for you? The second is, DevSecOps is not a tool, and this goes for DevOps as well. DevOps and DevSecOps is not a tool, but instead, it's a collection of processes and tools that help you achieve this philosophy. It's also not just a security layer, which is just lying above your DevOps practice. It's more of a means of ensuring security and ensuring compliance to the highest standard. The next one is very interesting because I hear this a lot, wherein I hear people saying both DevOps and now DevSecOps is just an initiative by software vendors to sell more software. Believe me, it's not. It's actually a community driven effort, and specifically DevSecOps is more of an open source community driven effort. So if you see most of the tools used in DevSecOps, you'll find a lot of tools which initially started out as open source. Sure, they might have gone ahead and monetized and also changed a couple of things in terms of the licensing model and all, but many of them started out as open source tools. And finally, it's a strategy which is driven by learning and experimentation. So is it safe to say that if you have implemented DevSecOps, there is no way someone can attack your software? No, that's not true. There will still be problems. There will still be people who will find ways to attack your application. But here's the difference. You will have the means and the strategy to resist that attack, as well as recover from that attack if it does happen. So I'm going to now talk about how to implement DevSecOps in your DevOps practice. So what you see right now is your usual DevOps practice, wherein you have everything from planning right up to monitoring from the dev side and the operation side. Now let's quickly talk about how you can add DevSecOps into this. So for starters, you can DevSecOps comes in right at the planning stage, not in the testing stage, as most of the people think. DevSecOps literally starts when you're planning a new sprint or you're planning a new release. So that is when your DevSecOps planning should actually start. So using things like threat model policies and trying to understand what are the problems that or what are the types of attacks that could be faced by your application. Also, it's a good time to consider security stories, not just the type of attacks that you could potentially be faced with, but also the type of attackers. What is the persona? Why is it that he wants to attack? All of these things are things that you need to look at right in your planning stage. Coming to the code stage, here you can you start analyzing your code, trying to see for any kind of vulnerabilities or any kind of problems that might be there. And then you can actually use test driven development and make sure that your code has the best infrastructure and is usable. So here again, there are various tools which you can use. You have Git for version control, you have npm, JFrog for your repo management. Coming to the next one is the build part. Now here is where you need to start analyzing your code, examining it. So it can be either through a static way, you do a static code analysis and you examine your source code, or it could be a dynamic code analysis wherein you try to identify the defects that the program could have when it's being run, maybe using unit testing or something like that. So again, a couple of tools that are very popular here. You probably have heard about Jenkins, Circle CI, Bamboo, Travis, all of these. So a lot of tools available. The next one is testing, and this is, I know, where majority of the people think that security would actually come into the picture, but no, it should be everywhere along with this. So in testing, you want to do penetration testing, see how your application uh, responds to load when it's overloaded, how it would respond to a DDoS attack. Also, try fuzzing by providing unexpected or random data. And again, there are a couple of applications which are popular. For example, you have your JMeter, you have Selenium, you have APM, and all of those. The next that you need to do is release and deploy. Now that you have your application ready in your development stage, now it goes over to the operations side, wherein you need to release it. And for this, you have some amazing tools which take care of all the heavy lifting. So you have tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, which take care of not just the deployment, but also automating the entire process of managing the infrastructure, as well as scanning it on deployment and post deployment as well. The next that comes in is operating and monitoring. So here you are looking, you're trying to capture logs, keep a monitor all the logs, see how things have been moving. If there's anything which is not smooth, then you want to raise a flag. Also, you want to use threat intelligence to scan for vulnerabilities, see if there is any potential attack that could happen on something that you're already using. And more importantly, you want to keep a check on your dependencies. This is one of the major problems and major reason why majority of the applications get attacked. The thing with dependencies is because there is a third party dependency or a component or any library that you're using which got compromised, there is a potential threat to your application as well. So you need to always keep track of your dependencies. And there are a lot of applications which help you do this. You have Nagios, you have Splunk, you have New Relic. In fact, the next slide will quickly talk about each of the applications and where they fit into the DevOps practice lifecycle. So yeah, these are some of the applications that you can use. Now, Now that you know how DevOps actually fits, how DevSecOps fits into the practice itself, let's see how we can quickly implement it. Now, given the shortage of time and the vastness of the topic itself, I'm just going to quickly go through this and talk about few of the major things that you really need to know. But there is a lot more than just what I'm going to cover. So for starters, you can start with something called as static application testing. Now, what static application testing does is it finds security vulnerabilities in your source code. The advantage in this is, first of all, since you have access to your framework, your design, and the way it's being implemented, you can, using the source code, try to figure out vulnerabilities early on. And this means whether it's in the code stage or during the build stage. And this is a good time to remediate and fix those issues, because if you remember, 30 times remember. So it helps you find defects early, and this entire process can be automated. So that's an even additional benefit. The only problem with static application testing is that it cannot discover errors which are caused during runtime. But for that, we have the dynamic application security testing. What this does is exactly the opposite of static application testing. So this would find vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the application when it's running. So the thing about both of this is, as you can see, they do two different things, but they nicely complement each other, which is why it's usually used in collaboration with one another. But even then, even though this kind of is what is being used majorly right now for DevSecOps, to a certain point, you will notice that both of these lack the abilities to test and secure modern web applications and mobile applications. Because, for example, your static application testing itself cannot handle libraries and frameworks from modern applications. Similarly, if you use a lot of third-party components, your tools could probably get choked because they do not understand this third-party libraries. Which is why there was a need to have something else, and that something else is an interactive application security testing, which performs analysis and analyzes your entire application in the entire process, right from the time it's being coded. It's everything, including the code, the runtime control and data flow, the configuration, the HTTP requests and responses that come and go, the libraries, frameworks, and other components that it uses, and even the backend connection information that the application uses and conveys. So all of this can be handled by interactive application testing. Now, again, the same thing, once you have this and you want to run it, which is when you use the runtime application security protection. Now, this is a cover on top of your interactive application security testing, in which, by chance, if the developer or the tester missed something, and there is somehow there is an attack, then runtime application protection protects your application, even if the perimeter, the network is breached, and because of some kind of vulnerabilities that were exposed. So it keeps running continuous security checks, and it will even respond to live attacks by terminating an attacker session and even letting the owner of the application know that your application is under attack, so that necessary measures and strategies can be employed to recover from the attack. So given one of the major things, again, note that I want to put out is a lot of security teams of late have started slacking because they think that runtime application security protection will take care. If there is some problem, it will flag it for them. It's not a good approach. The whole point of security is to be active and alert at every point in time. So now that you saw some of the concepts and some of the practices that you can use to implement DevSecOps. You must be wondering that this seems to be a lot to implement. So which is why to make this simple, we have some amazing tools which can help you at various stages in the cycle. So for example, to start with, one of the most common tool is Jenkins. Again, bear in mind, I am not promoting any of these tools. The only reason I picked them up is because most of this are open source, and they are also widely used both in individual capacities as well as in enterprise software companies. So the first one is Jenkins, which helps you in your CI/CD right from building and deploying. It has a lot of plugins which you can use, and you can kind of speed up your entire process. The next one is Sonatype, which helps a lot for improving your security. It helps you check for new vulnerabilities. It helps you keep auditing your software applications. We also have HashiCorp, which does some amazing work when it comes to deploying and automating your entire pipeline. But a honorable mention would be when it comes to managing sensitive information. And HashiCorp Vault is one of the most widely used tool when it comes to managing sensitive data and secrets. Next, we also have Chef, which is one of the most versatile tools because it literally has an application which takes care of every part of the life cycle. So for example, for managing your infrastructure, you have Chef Infra. To manage your build and deployment, you have Chef Habitat. For your testing, you have Chef Inspect. You can then automate the entire process using Chef Automate, and it even gives you a nice dashboard wherein you can visualize the entire process as it is. And finally, another very important tool, especially if you are new to this entire process and just want to quickly get started, OAPS has a Z attack proxy, which is a security testing scanner which can be used by beginners. All right. So in conclusion, what we saw today is DevSecOps primarily helps empower you and your team to help test your code better to make sure there are no vulnerabilities. It provides you real-time feedback. It helps you deploy faster. It also assures you that your software is not going to break down and wouldn't have any problems on deployment. It integrates testing to make sure that your software is of top-notch quality, and it also makes sure that you can guarantee maximum uptime to your users. And finally, it helps you protect your application, your users, and more importantly, your company against attacks by identifying them and stopping them at the right time. It also helps you mitigate any risk, and it always is on guard. That's all from me. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for joining us today at Open Source Days. If there are any questions, feel free to ask me, or you can also reach out to me one-on-one for any questions or anything that you want to know about DevSecOps, DevOps community, developer communities, or anything technological related. Thank you so much, and hope you enjoyed this session.